Most of the world and China will not be ready when Japan gets activated. And when I say activated, I mean turning on the Japanese war machine, which is a terrifying thing. I know a lot of kids and people who don't know anything about history look at Japan like, oh, they can't really do too much damage. They're such a quiet and peaceful people. They don't even have that much of an army right now. And this whole peaceful semblance of Japan is a recent development. It started after World War II when they lost to the Alliance and they put pacifism into their constitution, meaning that they would only develop their military from now on for self-defense purposes. But it's only a matter of time as China keeps making these bold military steps where the Japanese will finally amend that pacifist part of the constitution and start building up again like they used to. And of course that will come with approval, with a little bit of apprehension, but approval from the United States. For better context, let's just talk a little bit about Japan's history. Notably, 1543. That was the first year that Japan was exposed to the Portuguese arquebus. That was the rifle at the time. Now, the Japanese saw some utility in the arquebus and they allowed their samurai and some of their ashigaru to employ it, but it was really Oda Nobunaga who, about 4 or 5 decades after the introduction of this weapon, learned how effective this could be, and he pretty much took over all of Japan by implementing use of the arquebus. But the crazy thing is, by the time Oda Nobunaga died, there were more of these weapons in Japan, this one country, than there were in all of Europe. Or how about 1853, after centuries of Japanese isolationism, Commodore Perry led most of the US Navy to the capital and forced the emperor to open Japanese trade to the rest of the West or face obliteration. The Japanese realized they were completely outclassed and they acquiesced. Within 50 years or 51 years, the Japanese so heavily industrialized and militarized that they defeated Russia in the Russo-Japanese War. It was the only time that an Asian power was able to defeat one of the great imperial powers. By World War I, Japan told Russia, hey, let's put aside our differences and we'll fight the Axis powers together, and that's exactly what happened. But after World War I, when the entire world was being incentivized to demilitarize, that's not what Japan did. Japan began to heavily militarize to the point where they spent between 60 to 70% of their budget just on the military. By the beginning of World War II, Japan had the third largest navy on the planet. They had more aircraft carriers than anybody else. They had a larger air force than France and overall industrial output that was larger than France. And we all know the horrible and atrocious history that occurred during World War II, especially the people of China, the Philippines, Korea, all over the South Pacific. So for most of Japanese history, up till the end of World War II, Japan was known for being a very disciplined, industrious, and warlike place. Now, while the great military powers of the world today spend 3% or more of their GDP on the military, Japan has not crossed over 2% of spending since the end of World War II, and there's a reason for that, as we just discussed. Or I just told you it was a one-way discussion. But that's changing. Right now, Japan just passed a record defense budget on paper, saying that they are going to devote $55 billion a year to defense. In my opinion, they've secretly been putting in a lot more, just like China has, because for obvious reasons. And Japan does have a long way to go to catch up to the great military powers, but as I've expressed to you before in examples of this post, that's not going to be much of a problem, especially due to the fact that Japan does train a lot with the United States in military operations or military exercises. Japan's already been purchasing a lot of F-35 fighter jets from the United States, and most disturbingly, at least to China, they've been purchasing Tomahawk cruise missiles. I made a whole post on why Tomahawk cruise missiles are so scary, and I've attached it in the captions. You should watch it. Now, Japan's reasoning for building up in the military isn't to launch any attacks, but it's more for strike-back capability. That's a nice way to put it. When it comes to modern warfare, you cannot omit drones, since that's pretty much changed everything, and Japan has been working on that, especially over the past 3 years. Japan's been importing a wide array of drones from all over the world, most likely to reverse engineer them and build something better. I know China has been blamed for doing a lot of that, especially with American technology, but Japan was the first one to do this. In the 1970s and 1980s, anything that America made that was considered technologically savvy, the Japanese would just take it apart, reconstruct it into a cheaper, more efficient model. I don't think any of us would be surprised if Taiwan and the United States went to Japan and said, "Here, let's all work together on making a better drone." Now, the runner-up for the craziest thing that Japan is working on, or actually has accomplished, was the Soryu-class submarine. Not the first 10 that were built, but the 11th, 12th, and I believe the 13th. These submarines are not powered by nuclear, they're not powered by diesel. They are actually powered by lithium-ion batteries, meaning they run completely silent in the water. These are among the most undetectable submarines on the planet, right next to the Gotland class by Sweden. But the number one absolute craziest thing that the Japanese are working on is the railgun. Now, the United States, China, a bunch of other countries are trying to perfect this as well, but it looks like Japan is ahead of everybody here. And what makes the railgun so scary is that they fire projectiles without relying on anything explosive. Let's compare a railgun to its traditional counterpart, which is the 155 millimeter howitzer. Okay, these guys deliver about 20 pounds of TNT, a great deal of damage. They could take out a tank, they could also destroy simple structures, or even punch a hole through fortified ones. A railgun does 10 times more damage than 155 millimeter, but it is much more precise. So instead of having to clear a whole bunch of territory, they could just take out the exact structure that they want, and it's gone. It won't be there anymore. Think of it this way. A target that would take hours of bombardment from a traditional howitzer would just take one shot from a railgun. Don't get me wrong, like I said, the Japanese are ahead on perfecting it, but they haven't completely done it because the energy needs of a railgun are so incredibly high, and firing the projectile after a while begins to destroy the rails. But either way, Japan has been accomplishing a great deal, and they are barely devoting anything to the military. What do you think is going to happen once they start prioritizing defense development? To wrap this all up, I want you guys to keep this idea in your mind. Do not underestimate Japan. Thanks for watching, and let me know if you'd like me to talk more about the railgun or anything about Japan.